ESPN controls more than just highlight reels. It controls the pulse of NFL narratives. Its analysts shape public opinion, drive locker room conversations, and set the tone for how players are perceived long before they ever get a fair shot on the field. That power becomes dangerous when it's abused, and Rex Ryan's baseless attack on Shedeur Sanders is a prime example of how quickly that influence can turn toxic. During a nationally televised segment, Ryan accused Sanders of being lazy, disrespectful, and unwilling to put in the necessary work. No sources. No film. No teammate testimonials. Just a reckless string of character attacks presented as truth. And ESPN let it air. It wasn't commentary, it was sabotage. And it hit all the familiar notes used to undermine young black quarterbacks for decades.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
It's confidence rebranded as entitlement. Calmness reframed as disinterest. A composed demeanor interpreted as disrespect. The accusations weren't rooted in performance. They were rooted in stereotype. The fallout was immediate. Social media erupted. Analysts outside the network called it what it was: irresponsible and racially charged. ESPN, now scrambling to manage the blowback, quietly began distancing itself from Ryan's remarks. But the damage was done. Once a label like lazy gets attached to a quarterback, especially a young black one, it doesn't just fade. It follows them from city to city, locker room to locker room, embedded in scouting reports and whispered in front office meetings. Shedeur Sanders hasn't responded publicly. He hasn't lashed out or tried to defend himself in interviews. He's done exactly what players are told to do: stay focused, stay professional, let the game speak for itself. And that's part of what makes the smear campaign so transparent. It was never about Sanders' behavior, it was about controlling the narrative before he had a chance to define it himself. This isn't the first time media voices have created problems for black quarterbacks before they've had the opportunity to prove themselves, and it won't be the last. But what makes this case particularly egregious is the complete lack of evidence paired with the platform it was given. There was no journalism involved. No reporting. Just speculation from a disgruntled former coach with a mic. Sanders' treatment reflects a larger issue in sports media. One where players are expected to overcome not just defenders on the field but also manufactured storylines off it. The bar is higher, the scrutiny sharper, and the margin for error practically non-existent. The same media machine that elevates certain players chooses to bury others based on personal bias, coded language, or outdated archetypes. ESPN allowed its platform to be used as a weapon. Now it's facing the consequences, not just in public backlash but in credibility. Ryan's comments weren't just wrong. They exposed the network's willingness to let speculation override standards. Sanders doesn't need to defend his character. His actions already have. It's the media that needs to explain why it keeps letting this happen. Rex Ryan didn't just make a mistake. He broadcast one of the most reckless accusations you can throw at an athlete with nothing to back it up. In a now infamous ESPN segment, Ryan claimed Shedeur Sanders was lazy, didn't study film, and was disrespectful during practice. No context. No citation. No evidence. Just baseless, harmful words aimed squarely at a 21-year-old quarterback whose only problem seems to be that he's young, black, successful, and unafraid to carry himself with confidence. And ESPN? They let it air. There was no challenge on set. No fact-check. No disclaimer. Just Rex on camera, confidently assassinating a young athlete's character, and a network platforming it to millions. The backlash was immediate and justified. Fans, former players, media analysts, and everyday viewers all asked the same question: how did this get on air? How did someone in Rex Ryan's position, on ESPN of all places, feel comfortable making accusations so serious without offering a single piece of evidence? But this wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was a pattern playing out in real time. What happened to Shedeur isn't new. Sports media has a long, documented history of turning confident, high-profile black quarterbacks into cautionary tales before they even get a chance to prove themselves. The accusations are recycled, the language coded. Lazy. Entitled. Doesn't study. Not coachable. We've heard this before. We've seen the playbook. And Rex Ryan flipped straight to page 1. This segment wasn't about analyzing Sanders' performance or growth. It was about attacking his character. And in doing so, it exposed how easily and frequently black quarterbacks are subjected to a completely different standard. The kind of judgment that's often unfounded, unverified, and rooted in stereotype more than anything factual. Sanders, by contrast, has done nothing but show professionalism and resilience. Despite being the constant target of media scrutiny, he hasn't responded. He hasn't lashed out. He hasn't taken the bait. He's remained locked in, focused on his performance, his development, and his responsibilities. No outbursts, no drama, no public meltdown. Just silence and work. And yet, that professionalism wasn't enough to protect him from being mischaracterized on the biggest sports network in the country. Because truth isn't what fuels these narratives, controversy does. The issue here isn't just what Rex Ryan said. It's the fact that ESPN allowed it, aired it, and then tried to backpedal only after the internet lit up with outrage. Sources say disciplinary action is underway, but there's been no clear public correction. No retraction. No accountability where it matters. On air, in front of the same audience that heard the lie. The damage has already been done. And let's be clear, it is damaging. Comments like Ryan's don't stay in a single segment. They travel. They trend. They get quoted and echoed across platforms, talked about on podcasts, brought up by fans, and, most dangerously, absorbed by front office executives. In a league where public perception plays into real decisions about contracts and opportunities, words like lazy and disrespectful stick. Especially when they're said on ESPN by someone with a history in the NFL. What's worse? The same story doesn't apply to everyone. Quarterbacks like Cam Ward, Jackson Dart, and Dylan Gabriel make mistakes, struggle in games, even drop off mid-season. And what do we hear? Still developing. Finding their rhythm. Needs a better supporting cast. But when Shedeur, a young black quarterback, shows confidence or dares to flash his own watch on the sideline, suddenly the entire conversation becomes about discipline and character. It's a double standard. A systemic one. And it's rooted in years of sports media shaping narratives to fit their comfort zones. That's why Rex Ryan's attack didn't feel like a one-off. It felt like business as usual. And it needs to stop. Because what Sanders is up against isn't just coverage, it's control. Narrative control. Every time a segment like Ryan's airs, it pushes an agenda. That confident, self-assured, outspoken black athletes need to be humbled. That they're a problem if they don't perform the way media expects, or speak the way they want. That's why the video's discussion about media manipulation and agenda setting isn't an exaggeration. It's the truth. There's no other way to explain how stories like these always seem to surface at the most strategic times, coinciding with draft rumors, quarterback vacancies, or internal team pressure. Sanders' name has been quietly linked to conversations around the Cleveland Browns' struggles. And then, out of nowhere, comes a media attack on his work ethic. The timing isn't random. It's coordinated, whether consciously or not, to steer public opinion away from his potential and toward doubt. That's how the system keeps control. But here's what makes this different. The people watching now see the manipulation. And they're not staying quiet. Fans are pushing back. Commentators are demanding proof. Viewers are calling out the double standards. Because this wasn't subtle. This wasn't veiled. This was a blatant, unverified character attack, fueled by stereotype and laziness, and aired under the ESPN banner. And the response from Sanders? Still silence. Still poise. Still performance. That's the story the media won't tell, but it's the one that matters. In a sports world that constantly talks about mental toughness, Shedeur has shown more of it than the people paid to cover him. While Rex Ryan crumbled under the weight of his own false narrative, Sanders rose above it without even having to speak. That's leadership. That's maturity. That's character. And yet, ironically, it's the exact opposite of what Rex tried to sell to viewers. This should be ESPN's moment to take real responsibility. Not just to privately punish Ryan, but to publicly admit that what was aired was wrong. That their editorial process failed. That their platform allowed someone to spread an unverified, harmful narrative about a young athlete without challenge. And most of all, that they're committed to fixing it. Because anything less than that isn't accountability, it's reputation management. And if they're not going to lead with integrity, then it's on us to apply the pressure. We can't let this slide. Not just for Shedeur, but for every athlete who watches this happen and wonders if they're next. If their name will be used as a prop in someone's ratings grab. If their work, their growth, their professionalism will be erased by one false sentence said loud enough, confidently enough, and in front of a big enough camera. Shedeur Sanders doesn't need the media's approval. He's proving his worth every week. But the least they could do is stop trying to tear him down with lies. So here's the real call to action. Support the players who stay quiet and professional in the face of manufactured outrage. Challenge the networks that give a platform to character attacks with no proof. Demand better from the people who are supposed to inform, not manipulate. Because media narratives are powerful. But so are the people who refuse to let them stand. And if you're one of those people, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment. Call out the double standards when you see them. And share this message, because it's going to take all of us to shift the culture. Rex Ryan said Shedeur Sanders didn't work hard. The truth? He's doing the hardest work of all, rising above it. And he's not doing it for applause, he's doing it because his game speaks louder than any analyst ever could. And that's what they'll never be able to rewrite. The most telling part of this entire situation isn't what Rex Ryan said, it's how comfortable he felt saying it. That tells you everything you need to know about the culture inside ESPN and sports media more broadly. This wasn't some rogue commentator going off script. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment take that slipped through. This was a former NFL head coach, given a national stage on the biggest sports network in the country, deciding to fire off an unsubstantiated accusation about a young player's work ethic, and expecting no pushback. Because that's how it works. They say it. The network airs it. The clip gets chopped up and shipped to social media. The YouTube thumbnails go up. And before anyone stops to ask, is this even true? The damage is already done. That's how fast narrative spreads. And when it comes from someone with Rex Ryan's status, it doesn't just echo, it gets written into the record. That's why this isn't just about one segment. It's about a media machine that's perfectly set up to turn confident black athletes into villains on cue. We've seen it with Lamar Jackson. We saw it with Cam Newton. And now we're seeing it with Shedeur Sanders. Every time a black quarterback challenges the traditional archetype, every time they show charisma, swagger, or dare to own the moment, someone in a studio decides it's time to bring them down a peg. And they don't critique the play. They go after the person. Suddenly, it's not about completion percentage or red zone efficiency, it's about leadership. Attitude. Does he care? Is he coachable? Does he study enough film? Words that aren't rooted in stats or performance or reality, but in coded language meant to plant doubt without ever having to prove anything. That's what Rex Ryan did to Shedeur Sanders. And the fact that it aired without a single challenge should concern everyone who watches sports and expects some level of professionalism from the people delivering the news. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If Shedeur Sanders were white, this segment never would have happened. The track record is clear. Quarterbacks who fit the traditional mold are granted benefit after benefit. They get described as fiery instead of immature, passionate instead of emotional, and when they mess up, he'll learn. He needs time. He's got the tools. But Shedeur shows up with confidence, earned confidence, and he's labeled a problem. That's not journalism. That's profiling. And ESPN let it slide. Not only did they air the segment, they allowed it to go viral under their brand. They gave it legs. They let it take root in the public discourse, knowing it would shape how fans and teams perceive a young man's character. And now that the backlash has landed, they want to sweep it under the rug, hoping a quiet timeout for Rex Ryan will make people forget it ever happened. But we're not forgetting. And neither is Shedeur. He may not have said a word publicly, but that doesn't mean he's not aware. He sees it. Every player sees it. They know which narratives follow them, which ones they have to work twice as hard to shake, and which ones were never written for someone who looks like them in the first place. And yet, Shedeur stays silent. Not because he can't defend himself, but because he doesn't have to. His game does that for him. His professionalism. His control. The fact that week after week he shows up, executes, and proves that no matter how loud the noise gets, he refuses to be shaken. And that's what scares them most. Because when you can't rattle a player, when you can't get a reaction, when you throw the worst at someone and they just keep playing, the media loses control of the story. And they don't know what to do with that. They tried to provoke him. He didn't bite. They tried to undermine him. He elevated. They tried to rewrite the narrative. He kept writing the truth. But even though Shedeur's handling it with grace, that doesn't mean we let it slide. Because the next player they target might not have the same platform. The next athlete might not have the same support system. And the next narrative might be even more damaging. That's why this matters. It's not just about protecting Shedeur, it's about protecting the standard. It's about saying loud and clear, if you're going to accuse a player of something as serious as being lazy, unprepared, or disrespectful, you better bring facts. You better show your work. And if you don't get to walk away with a shrug and a, my bad. Because lives are affected. Reputations are affected. Careers are affected. And sports media needs to stop acting like their words don't have weight. That goes for Rex Ryan. That goes for the producers who let it air. That goes for every editor who chose virality over truth. Because this time the audience noticed. And this time people pushed back. So here's what ESPN needs to do. Say it. Out loud. On air. Acknowledge that the segment was wrong. Acknowledge that the claims were baseless. Acknowledge that it was a failure of editorial oversight and that a young man's name was dragged for no reason. And moving forward, commit to doing better. That means standards. That means fact-checking. That means putting guardrails in place so that athletes, especially black quarterbacks, aren't constantly subjected to baseless character attacks in the name of entertainment. Anything less is cowardice. Because if ESPN can't own its mistakes, then it's not a leader in sports journalism. It's just a megaphone for whoever's loudest. And we don't need more noise. We need truth. Shedeur Sanders doesn't need a public defense. He's not asking for it, but he deserves it. And every viewer who sees through this pattern deserves to know that someone is willing to say enough is enough. Shedeur Sanders already passed his test. He handled the unprovoked attack with more grace than most seasoned professionals. He didn't lash out. He didn't release a statement. He didn't go on a media tour to clean up a mess he didn't create. He kept doing what he's done since the start of his college career. Showing up, leading his team, staying focused, and letting his play speak. Meanwhile, ESPN stayed quiet. The same platform that aired a lie about his character suddenly had nothing to say when it came time to correct it. And that silence? That was louder than anything Rex Ryan said. Because when you're ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports, you don't get to sit this one out. You don't get to let your analysts say a young man doesn't work hard, doesn't study, disrespects the game, and then act like it's just another hot take gone too far. This wasn't commentary. It was defamation disguised as analysis. And the only reason it didn't become the full-on smear campaign it was clearly trying to be is because people spoke up. The backlash was swift and overwhelming. Former players, sports journalists, fans, and even some current analysts called it out. Not just because it was wrong, but because it was transparent. We all saw it. Rex Ryan took the most tired, lazy stereotype in the book and used it against one of the most scrutinized young quarterbacks in the country, on the largest stage in sports. And what made it worse was how effortlessly it fit into the same media machine that's been pulling this play for decades. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a mirror. And what it reflected was ugly. The truth is, Shedeur Sanders was never the issue. The issue is the double standard that gets deployed every time a confident black quarterback doesn't fit the league's preferred narrative. It's the way media outlets like ESPN sit in that tension, profit off of it, and then pretend their hands are clean when things blow up. The issue is the fact that these narratives keep resurfacing whenever a player becomes too visible, too successful, too outspoken, or, God forbid, too comfortable in his own skin. Suddenly, they're not just talented, they're controversial. Flashy. A distraction. All of it code. All of it calculated. And what Rex Ryan did was hit play on that same broken tape. The one that has haunted players like Lamar Jackson, Cam Newton, and Jameis Winston. The one that weaponizes personality. That rewrites confidence as cockiness. That twists authenticity into arrogance. But the problem with that narrative today? People aren't buying it anymore. Shedeur is too visible. Too polished. Too clearly locked in. And most importantly, too consistent in his professionalism for this to stick. So when Rex tried to pull out that old-school critique, it backfired. Spectacularly. Instead of denting Shedeur's image, it shattered ESPN's credibility. Because when your analyst makes a statement that's serious, without any factual support, and your network airs it like it's valid, that's a failure of journalism. That's a breakdown in standards. That's not sports talk. That's character sabotage. And when the player being targeted is someone who's done nothing but rise to every occasion, yeah, people are going to notice. But now that the spotlight is back on ESPN, the question is, what now? Do they do the right thing and publicly address what happened? Or do they ride it out, assume people will forget, and let Rex Ryan slink back onto the screen with no explanation and no accountability? If it's the latter, then they're telling every young athlete, especially the ones who look like Shedeur, that truth doesn't matter. That as long as the ratings are good, the damage is acceptable. That false narratives are just part of the game. But this game is changing. Athletes have platforms. Fans have voices. Viewers aren't just passively watching, they're paying attention. And this time we saw it all. We saw the lie. We saw the silence. And we saw who stood up and who stayed quiet. And while Shedeur Sanders didn't say a word, his actions said everything. He kept showing up, kept leading, kept performing. And in the process, exposed just how hollow and baseless the media's criticism really was. That's the part they can't spin. Because no matter how many times they try to shift the narrative, the receipts are there. Shedeur didn't fold. He didn't fade. He didn't feed the fire. He just kept winning, on the field, off the field, and in the court of public opinion. So here's the challenge to ESPN. Fix this. Not with PR. Not with edited replays. Not with quiet suspensions. With real accountability. With transparency. With an acknowledgement that your platform, your process, and your analyst got it wrong. Because the longer you wait, the louder the silence gets. And the louder the silence gets, the more people start to wonder. If you'll let this happen to Shedeur Sanders, who else will you let it happen to? If you're tired of the double standards, tired of the narrative manipulation, tired of the media using baseless claims to define young athletes, say something. Drop a comment. Share this message. Subscribe for coverage that actually holds the powerful accountable and stands up for the truth. Because the media isn't untouchable. And Shedeur Sanders? He doesn't need defending, but he deserves the truth. And we're not done until he gets it.